Hi boys and girls. Here we are again to talk about the Hanover stained glass piece that we're making for above your door to the school forest. And today we're going to talk about how to solder all the pieces together, because up until now I've been cutting the glass and putting the foil around it and holding it together tightly so that the pieces don't move. Today we're going to solder it together just so that they really don't move, and then we can lift it up and put it in the window so that it can hang there. Right now we have all this copper foil that goes around all the pieces, and they're butting up against each other, and they're all around all the pieces of glass. And now what we're going to do is we're going to solder them so that they stay together, so it's a little more permanent. And this is what solder is, and it's a blend of a couple different kinds of metal, and you can see it's very, very flexible. It's very, very soft. And solder, it's kind of funny because it's spelled S-O-L-D-E-R. It's kind of got a silent L in it, and we can melt it. It's so soft that we can melt it with a very, very high temperature. And what we're going to do is we're going to melt it so that it goes into all these places where the two seams come together, and then that'll hold everything together. But the solder won't stick to the copper unless we do something to it first. Okay. And this is something called flux, and it's spelled F-L-U-X. And what it is, it's like a lot like Vaseline. It's real sticky and kind of goopy and kind of greasy. But what this does is when we put this on the joints where the two pieces come together, it does something to the copper so that the solder will stick to it. Now, because it's so greasy and because it's so kind of oily, I want to make sure I don't get a lot of it on the glass, because eventually I have to clean it off the glass. So I want to make my job as easy as possible. So I just get a little bit on the tip, and I just go along all these soldering joints, and I make sure that there's a covering of flux on all the places where I want the solder to go. So I have to do the whole piece, every place I want the solder to go and stick to the copper foil. So I just try to keep it really clean. I try not to make it too messy and get too much on the glass, because I don't want to have a huge job cleaning it up later. Okay, so I'll do a couple joints here where I'll show you how we solder this together. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to do a couple here just to show you how it works, and then we'll talk about what steps come after the soldering. Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about is the soldering iron, and this is what we use to melt the solder into the joints. And this has to be crazy hot for it to work, to melt the solder. This part is the part that gets really super hot, so I always have to hold it by the handle part down here. And then I have this special holder, which is really good to use, because if I have to stop soldering for a minute, I can just go like this, and then the super hot soldering iron is safe. It doesn't touch anything. It doesn't burn anything. If it seems like the tip is getting kind of dirty, I can just kind of clean it off on this sponge here that's just kind of wet with some water. And then I use this is my temperature control. So I put this up to the certain temperature where I know that the soldering iron is going to melt the solder. Okay, so I'll come back over here, move this a little closer. And what we have to do is, I'm going to move this a little bit closer, is I have to have the solder and the soldering iron and the stained glass all kind of have to come together to do the soldering. So what I have to do is melt a little bit of the solder and just kind of go along like this. And we can see that this turns it to a liquid. This melts it so fast because it's so hot. And I just keep adding, moving this in so that the soldering iron melts the solder. If there's some places, the soldering, this is the kind of the trickiest part of stained glass, because you have to make sure everything is nice and smooth. If it gets kind of bumpy, you can re-melt it again. So you can see this is getting shorter, and I can just move this right along here like this. And there's a little place right there I might want to fill that in so it's not quite so flat like that, and I just go along like that. Now what happens is this turns, that's hard already, so it melts, and then as soon as my iron gets away from it, it turns hard again. Now it's hot, so I can't touch it with my finger, but you can see that it's not melted anymore. It's a very nice solid piece of solder. Okay, so I can go along. Let's see if I can remember where I put the soldering, the flux. Okay, you can see, and I just have to go along to all the different places where I put the flux. And let's see, I think I did one along here. And I just go along and see there's a little spot there. I think I missed it with the flux, so I have to go back and put a little more flux in there. And then it fills it in. Okay, so that's kind of how it works with the soldering iron. It's super hot, and this is super soft, so it melts really quickly, and then it fills up this space, and now that's a really solid piece. We can't see the copper anymore, and that'll stay together really, really nicely. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, or what I've done, after I do this, after I do the solder like this, then you can see there's a little bit of solder, of flux that gets on the glass here. So after the whole thing gets soldered, then I have to go back and I have to go over it and I have to clean off the flux. So it's a kind of a little cleaning job. First I wipe it down with a paper towel to get as much flux off as I can. I have a spray thing that I can spray this and take a little more of the flux off. And I also even use a little bit of Dawn because it takes the grease away really easily. And I spray it with Dawn and wipe it off. So it's a lot of cleaning. First use the flux, then you use the solder, and then you have to clean the flux off the glass because you don't want that. You want to get rid of that greasy part. Okay, that's not the last step in this though. Oh, excuse me. This is the back side of the piece, and I want to show you what the front side looks like. I did go ahead and solder this whole front part. This is the front now, and you can see that this is a very, very shiny piece. The solder is very, very shiny. And if we look back at what the summer panel looked like, we can see that the solder is all really, really dark. And that's a little better, to look at the stained glass, to have it black like this is a little better because you're not distracted by all the shiny solder. So what we have to do on this piece is make this solder look like this. And there's another kind of liquid that I put on it, and it's called a patina. And a patina is how you can, the surface of things, it's how you can color the surface of things. And what I do is I take a little bit of this patina, I don't know if you can see this over here, and I put a little bit in the lid, because I just use a little bit at a time. Oh, that's a lot. And then I use a brush, a different brush than I used for the flux. And you can see I've used this brush quite a bit. And then what I do is I just go over the solder and I paint it with the patina, and then that turns it black. And then it's not quite as distracting to see all that shiny, shiny, bright silver solder. And again, when this is all done, I have to go back and I have to clean all the extra off because I got a little bit more messy with that. This cleans up better than the flux. The flux is a little bit more greasy. This one just has to be wiped off. Okay, so I would just go back and just cover all the soldering joints with this patina. Okay, and then it'll look more like this one when I get done. Now, usually when I clean these things off, I want to keep these kind of liquids and things off my hands. So usually I use a pair of gloves to clean these kind of things off. Okay, so after I did all the flux on there and then the solder, and then I cleaned off the flux, and then I used the patina, then I clean off the patina. Then what'll happen is then it will come time to put the zinc frame, and we talked about the zinc frame before. And it'll be similar to this one. It'll go around the whole thing so that you won't see this edge. It'll just kind of make a nice frame for it. Now, when we take a look at this, we can see here's a soldered edge that goes here. Here's a soldered edge. Here's a soldered edge. So now what I have to do is connect these to the stained glass. So here I put a little bit of flux, a little bit of flux, a little bit of flux, and then I solder here and here. Well, this will go in here like this. It'll slide in. Flux and flux and flux and solder and solder and solder, and then it'll all be connected together as like a big frame. And then I go back with the patina and I do the patina over this part. So when I'm all done with this, This will be soldered to this, and I'll have the black patina over everything, so everything has a nice black, dark frame around it. You might think you're done then, but I have one more final step. After all the panels are done, after all the zinc is added, then I have something called a glass wax or a glass polish, and it's something that I dab onto a cloth and just polish everything up, and it just makes this look a little bit shinier and a little bit brighter, and it looks all really, really nice and clean. So there's a lot of different steps to this. They're not hard steps, but it's kind of like you have to do some cleaning in between, and you know, once you finish with the glass, you're still not done. You still have to do the patina and then the polish and then the final assembly, and then before we can get it into your window above the door. Okay, I'll be able to finish this one today, and then I'll be starting on the winter one, and once we finish that winter one in the next week or so, we should be good to get it up on the door. That's your entrance to the school forest. So hope you enjoy this. If you have any questions, I think Mrs. Bolt might be willing to take any questions and pass them along to me. And hopefully we'll be able to see this up on your window pretty soon.